I am coming from you in my garage because I'm on the struggle bus today. I have been trying to get this video done since last night and ignore the cars going by, and I just can't seem to do it. And I just got so frustrated and depressed that I had to change scenery and just come out of my house for a while to get some fresh air. So that's the reason why I'm in the garage, and I hope that the audio is halfway decent. We'll see. But anyway, enough of me giving excuses and complaining. I just wanted to give this little bit of disclaimer and apology as to why the video is going up late. Excuse the scarf. I'm also having a bad hair day today, but you know, I am very dedicated and motivated to making sure I get these videos to you, and I really hope you watch them, because some days the struggle is real and it's hot out here. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mrs. Williams, and welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be the last video for representations of data sets. So today we're going to discuss the last graph to represent data sets, and that's histograms. But as always, let's go ahead and write down the standard and the essential questions. Today's standard is MGSE 9-12.S.ID.1. I can read, interpret, and create graphs to represent data sets. Today's essential questions are: number 1, why should you use graphs to represent data sets? Number 2, how do you create a histogram? Number 3, which statistics are easily calculated from a histogram? Number 4, what are some advantages and disadvantages for representing a data set using a histogram? So let's talk about histograms. Histograms are often confused with bar graphs, but they are actually quite different. I'm going to put a picture of a bar graph up here and a histogram down here, so that you can kind of see the difference. But the two main things that I want you to remember about bar graphs and histograms is that bar graphs typically display categorical data, you know, colors, flavors of ice cream, types of cars, while histograms typically only shows numerical data. And the second difference that I want you to make sure you remember is that bar graphs often have spaces in between the bars, while histograms, the bars have to touch each other. So just remember those two differences between bar graphs and histograms. Talking strictly about histograms, histograms are another way to graph a data set, and we typically use these when we have really big data sets as well. The good thing about histograms versus box plots, whew, a bird just flew by and scared me. What was I saying? Box plots can also display a large data set. Well, histograms can do the same thing, but with histograms, you can really see the shape of the data, which we will talk about more in class. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and see an example of how to make a histogram. So here are the steps on how to make a histogram. Number 1, determine the minimum and maximum of the data set. Number 2, decide on the number of intervals for your graph. Generally, you want between 5 to 10 intervals, which will equal 5 to 10 bars. Number 3, divide the range, meaning the maximum minus the minimum, divide the range into equal intervals and label them. Number 4, tally the number of data values in each interval. Number 5, draw and label the axes for your graph. So that'll be the x-axis and the y-axis. And number 6, draw the bars to represent the frequency of each interval. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to show you how to create a histogram strictly on the computer instead of me writing it out by hand. But just try to do the best you can with writing it in your notebook. It's just a little bit easier for me to demonstrate on the computer. So we're going to represent the following data set as a histogram. And we have this very long set of numbers. And we want to display it as a histogram. So the first step we would have to do is calculate the minimum and the maximum of the data set. Well, I've already done that for you. The minimum is 0 because that's our lowest number, and our maximum is 14. And then we're going to decide on the number of intervals, and I said 5. Intervals just means like a range, how many ranges of numbers. And so I did 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 11, 12 to 14. Now normally I will do this for you. So don't worry about the first 3 steps that I gave you. I'll typically do this part for you, but just know in the future, if you have to create a histogram from scratch, then you would have to do steps 1, 2, and 3. But we're going to start with step 4, and that's our tally. And with our tally, that simply means we need to figure out, well, how many numbers do we have that are between 0 and 2? So if we go up here and we would just count all the numbers that are between 0 and 2. So let's count how many zeros do I have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 zeros. So I'm going to put a 7 in for the number of zeros. Now, within this interval, we have ones too. Well, how many ones do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 ones. So let's put 5 in for 5 ones. And the number of twos. So let's count the number of twos. 1, 2, 3. We have 3 twos. So we will add all of these numbers up and determine our frequency. So if we add 7 plus 5 plus 3, we get 15. So there are 15 numbers in our data set that's between 0 and 2. So now we need to count how many numbers are between 3 and 5. So we would count how many 3s, count how many 4s, and count how many 5s. So let's count the number of 3s. We only have 1 3. Count the number of 4s. So that's 1, 2. 2 4s. And the number of 5s. 1, 2, 2 5s. So we will again add all of these up to determine our frequency, which would be 1 plus 2 plus 2 is 5. And we would keep going on with this pattern. We would count the number of 6s, the number of 7s, and the number of 8s, and we will put them here, add them up to get our frequency. Add all the number of 9s, 10s, and 11s. So I went on ahead and I calculated all of these for us. We had 2 6s, 0 7s, and 0 8s. So 2 plus 0 plus 0 is 2. We had 2 9s, 1 10, and 0 11s.
2 plus 1 plus 0 equals 3. We had no 12s, no 11s, and 1 14. So 0 plus 0 plus 1 is 1. So these are our frequencies. So there are 15 numbers between 0 and 2. There are 5 numbers between 3 and 5. 2 numbers between 6 and 8. 3 numbers between 9 and 11. And 1 number between 12 and 14. So this determines our frequency. Now we just have to graph. So now it's time to graph our frequencies. And you'll see at the bottom, I've inputted our intervals. So our intervals here will go at the bottom. Now we just have to graph the same way we would a bar graph. We have 15 numbers. So for 0 to 2, I will draw a bar that goes all the way up to 15. So I will start here and draw my bar. So we've shown that 0 to 2, there's 15 numbers between there. The next one is 3 to 5 has 5 numbers. So I would draw my bar all the way up to the 5. So here. And let's make that a different color. We'll make it orange. Then we have 6 to 8 has 2, so I will draw up to the 2. Make it a little bit bigger. And we'll change the color. Then 9 to 11 goes up to 3, so again, I will just draw my bar at the 3. And change the color. And then 12 to 14 has 1. So I would draw my bar up to the 1. And change the color. So there is our histogram. Notice how each one of our bars touch each other. So that's how they're different from bar graphs. Histograms, each one has to touch the other. So make sure you remember that when you draw your histogram.
So as you see from the example, making a histogram can be a little bit complicated and a little bit tedious, but don't worry. In most cases, I'll give you a template and the intervals so that you can just tally up your numbers and draw your frequency bars. But I did give you the steps for making a histogram from scratch, just in case you have to do that in the future. Let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of histograms. Oh my goodness, there's bugs flying by my face. Like I said earlier, histograms are terrific. I mean, phenomenal for graphing very, very large data sets. If you have a data set that has hundreds or even thousands of numbers in it, you definitely want to use a histogram because remember, we don't count each individual number, we count intervals from 0 to 10 or 0 to 100 if we had to. So that's one of the advantages. The second advantage is looking at the shape of the data. We can kind of trace how the data would look, which will be very, very helpful when we talk about skewness, which again we'll talk about in class. So just remember that word, skewness, and I'm going to write it down here for you to see how the word is spelled. But there are some disadvantages to histograms. Just like the box plot, we no longer have access to our original data or our original numbers. Once we draw the histograms, we don't know what their original numbers are anymore. So calculating certain statistics becomes very, very difficult. We can no longer calculate things such as the mean. It can even be difficult trying to figure out the median depending on how your bars are set up. So we lose the ability to calculate some of the statistics. And it's also probably, out of all of the representations, the histogram is probably the most difficult to draw, so that's another disadvantage. But the only thing that I really want you to take from this video is that histograms are great for very large data sets, and they are great for analyzing the shape of a data set, which can tell us a lot of different things about a data set from just looking at the shape. That's all for this video. Again, I'm trying to keep the videos a little bit shorter. Make sure that you do go ahead and write down all of those notes. This time I did something a little bit different. I showed you the notes and how to create the histogram on my computer because it was just a little bit simpler, and you're able to easily see how to tally up the data and how to draw the bars a little bit easier on the computer. So do the best you can. I'm so sorry for the car. So do the best you can with trying to mimic that or writing that in your composition notebook. We're going to do some practice in class, so don't worry about that as well. But also make sure that you copy down the advantages and the disadvantages, because we're going to talk about that as well in class. I'm going to go ahead and give you the motivational quote for today. And this is one that I really had to look up today and motivate me and motivate myself to get some work done. And that's, a person is not defined by their success, but rather by their failures. And I took that to mean simply that you learn way more from your mistakes in life and overcoming obstacles than you ever could from just getting through life easily. So tell me what you think that motivational quote means by leaving a comment in the comment below. If you learned something from this video, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. I could probably use a little bit of just cheering on, and I'll see you in class.